The anti-Trump Republican coalition known as the Lincoln Project just put together a terrifying 4-minute advertisement talking about what a second Trump administration would look like based on the official Republican Party platform and its true agenda, Project 2025. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we've got a clip here. Again, this is the longest ad that I've seen of the Lincoln Project. It's 4 minutes long. It's terrifying. It's based on something that was published earlier today, the Republican Party's official party platform. And most of the provisions are watered down versions of what we saw in Project 2025, the literal Republican Party supervillain plot to radically reshape the federal government that we've been talking about quite a bit on this channel. I want you to see this Lincoln Project ad. We may or may not interrupt because, again, it's 4 minutes and there's a lot to say. There's a lot to unpack. But either way, we're going to watch this and unpack it together. This is from the Lincoln Project.
November 5th, 2024. Donald Trump defeats a divided and dispirited Democratic campaign. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump is sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Unfortunately, he keeps his promises. Trump seizes control of a divided government, signing hundreds of executive orders implementing Project 2025. Trump replaces over 50,000 civil servants with hardline MAGA loyalists. The federal oath of office now requires declaring loyalty to the president, not the Constitution. Protected by the Supreme Court's grant of total immunity for official acts, Donald Trump orders the Department of Justice to arrest members of the January 6th Commission, current and former DOJ employees, and political opponents for treason, election interference, and conspiracy. He declares it to be an official act. Trump ends birthright citizenship by executive order and turns millions of American-born citizens into illegal aliens overnight. Mass deportations begin. Hundreds of thousands, including legal U.S. residents and American citizens, are imprisoned in newly built camps. Protests erupt. Trump addresses the nation from the Oval Office, invoking the Insurrection Act and declaring the protesters a danger to American sovereignty. He orders the National Guard to use deadly force to suppress the protests. In the wake of the bloody violence, Trump declares nationwide martial law, awarding himself new powers under the freshly signed American Sovereignty Protection Order, which defines protest of immigration policies as non-protected speech and a threat to national security. Governors in New York, California, Illinois, and elsewhere declare their opposition, promising to refuse compliance in their states. Trump orders their arrests. Trump pardons every January 6th attacker, including those who assaulted the police, and in a White House ceremony issues a new presidential medal honoring them. Many are given jobs in his administration. The Department of Education is renamed the Department of American Values and mandates a nationwide Christian nationalist curriculum for all schools receiving federal aid. Trump, joined by Speaker Mike Johnson and evangelical leaders, announces that the Department of Health and Human Services has reclassified mifepristone, making it illegal to distribute or prescribe, as well as new HHS regulations that make IVF treatments impossible to legally administer. Trump reverses one campaign promise by declaring a national abortion ban by executive order. Challenges to his authority are rejected by the Supreme Court, which has seen new appointments from Trump after it was expanded to 12 justices. He signs an executive order removing abortion records from HIPAA privacy regulations and announces a new federal data sharing program so states can monitor women's periods. Thousands are detained while crossing state lines under suspicion of seeking an abortion. Trump's acting Secretary of Defense, a disgraced ex-general, fires over 400 generals and admirals, leaving the military leaderless. Other Trump appointees purge the ranks of the CIA, FBI, and Department of Justice. By executive order, Trump withdraws the United States from NATO and ends Pentagon cooperation with Ukraine. Russian tanks enter Kyiv. Vladimir Zelensky is killed. It is announced that Trump will run for a third term, claiming he was unfairly cheated in the 2020 election. His Supreme Court ultimately agrees with this interpretation, paving the way for Trump's 2028 re-election. If you hear all this and believe it isn't possible, then ask yourself, What did you believe was impossible just 8 years ago? This isn't a fantasy. It's Trump's plan, and he's counting on you to believe it couldn't happen.
Pretty stark stuff, pretty dark stuff. And I understand reflexively there are some people that say this is so far-fetched, but it's really not. This is, first and foremost, we'll probably go back and play some of this on like 1.5 speed or something so we can walk through a lot of this stuff piece by piece. But the first thing I would just want to establish here is that the institutions of the United States are not divinely crafted nor divinely enforced. This idea that it can't possibly happen here was a notion that was held by every place it did happen. You know, pre-Nazi Germany thought this could never happen. All sorts of countries which have succumbed to authoritarianism thought it could never happen there. It did, because every institution, including ours, are man-made and maintained by people of good faith, reciprocal good faith. This is not an episode of Supernatural. This is not the Little Mermaid. Institutions, even the words written on the United States Constitution, are not divinely crafted nor enforced. So part of Donald Trump's plan, part of Project 2025, part of the scheme of the 110 conservative organizations behind the Republican Party, behind Trump, is to fill these institutions with people who are loyal to them, not the Constitution. So again, it's entirely possible that all of these things could happen. There is literally nothing preventing it. And simply saying, well, it didn't happen in Trump term 1, which ergo it can't happen in Trump term 2, is ridiculous. Guardrails fail, right? There's a reason cars crash through guardrails all the time. They can become weakened over time. They can become insufficiently reinforced, and negligent or determined people can crash through them. And we have not done it nearly enough to reinforce America's democratic guardrails. So I want to play through some of these. Again, we're going to play it at 1.75 speed now that you've heard through the whole thing, and unpack some of it together.
November 5th, 2024. Donald Trump defeats a divided and dispirited Democratic campaign. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump is sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Unfortunately, he keeps his promises. Trump seizes control of a divided government, signing hundreds of executive orders implementing Project 2025. Trump replaces over 50,000 civil servants with hardline MAGA loyalists. The federal oath of office now requires declaring loyalty to the president, not the Constitution.
So Project 2025 does require a radical reshaping of the federal government, and they do want to turn civil servants, career bureaucrats, career experts who have served under Republican and Democratic administrations into at-will fireable employees by the president. This involves the implementation of the Schedule F executive order. This is entirely possible within Project 2025, and particularly if Republicans control one or both chambers of Congress. They already have a sympathetic Supreme Court, so this is very possible.
Protected by the Supreme Court's grant of total immunity for official acts, Donald Trump orders the Department of Justice to arrest members of the January 6th Commission, current and former DOJ employees, and political opponents for treason, election interference, and conspiracy. He declares it to be an official act.
Again, I see nothing in the Supreme Court decision that was recently announced on immunity, Trump v. United States, which would preclude this from happening. Chief Justice Roberts, in his majority opinion, he wags his finger at the dissenters, Elena Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, as saying, oh, these are hysterical notions, but he actually doesn't explain why these notions are precluded. He doesn't say, hey, listen, for those of you who are worried about coups and political assassinations and mass political arrests, here are the safeguards in our decision that would prevent that. No, instead they give pretty wide berth. Absolute immunity for anything within the core executive functions, presumptive immunity for anything that counts as an official duty of the president. And you can say, well, you could overcome that in court, except they really don't leave much by way of a test or daylight. Basically, anything that they say is palpably or manifestly in the president's official capacity must be considered immune. So it's an incredibly challenging burden to overcome. And ultimately, any attempt to appeal it would go to this right-wing, Trump-dominated Supreme Court. So we have no reason to believe that they would be a meaningful check on Trump in this respect.
Trump ends birthright citizenship by executive order and turns millions of American-born citizens into illegal aliens overnight. Mass deportations begin. Hundreds of thousands, including legal U.S. residents and American citizens.
This is something that Trump's aide Stephen Miller has talked about. This is actually part of the official Republican Party platform. They do, in their own words, they want to orchestrate the biggest mass deportation movement in American history, which would involve rounding up millions of people. And Trump has even said in interviews that it's entirely possible that American citizens might be swept up in it as well. So again, very possible.
Are imprisoned in newly built camps. Protests erupt. Trump addresses the nation from the Oval Office, invoking the Insurrection Act and declaring the protesters a danger to American sovereignty.
Again, very possible. The Insurrection Act gives enormous latitude to the president to deploy the military and other law enforcement organs against protesters, against a potential insurrection. And legal experts say it's non-justiciable, that the Supreme Court of the United States really wouldn't be in a position to review it. Of course, they may assume that power into themselves, in which case they're very likely to back Trump. And even if they don't back Trump, why would he be obligated to adhere to it? Trump doesn't exactly follow the rules. So every which way, this is all predicated on good faith, and Trump is well known not to have any. And he has talked about deploying the Insurrection Act before many, many, many times.
Orders the National Guard to use deadly force to suppress the protests. In the wake of the bloody violence, Trump declares nationwide martial law, awarding himself new powers under the freshly signed American Sovereignty Protection Order, which defines protest of immigration policies as non-protected speech and a threat to national security. Governors in New York, California, Illinois, and elsewhere declare their opposition, promising to refuse compliance in their states. Trump orders their arrests. Trump pardons every January 6th attacker, including those who assaulted the police, and in a White House ceremony issues a new presidential medal honoring them.
Again, he has talked publicly, repeatedly, about not only specific January 6th pardons, but mass pardons as well. Just January 6th protest-wide pardons. And again, the pardon is a core power of the president. There is no constitutional, no textualized limiting principle on the president's ability to pardon. And even if there were some sort of implied limiting principle for the president's pardon, why would this Supreme Court try to limit it? They say that anything within the president's, core exclusive powers is absolutely immune, and anything which constitutes any sort of official act by the president must be presumptively immune with an impossibly high standard to overcome. Nothing preventing this.
Many are given jobs in his administration. The Department of Education is renamed the Department of American Values and mandates a nationwide Christian nationalist curriculum for all schools receiving federal aid.
The Trump administration, Donald Trump and his allies and Project 2025 have explicitly called for the abolition of the Department of Education, including many prominent Republican politicians. So again, not exactly outside the realm of possibility.
Trump, joined by Speaker Mike Johnson and evangelical leaders, announces that the Department of Health and Human Services has reclassified mifepristone, making it illegal to distribute or prescribe, as well as new HHS regulations that make IVF treatments impossible to legally administer.
Again, Project 2025 has basically called for all of this. The revocation of the FDA's authorization for mifepristone, using the Comstock Act to prevent the USPS from shipping abortifacients and birth control pills, and things like mifepristone as well. And going back to it, while I was thinking about it, in terms of trying to enforce a nationwide, Christo-nationalist agenda, we see that Republican states, particularly I think it was Louisiana recently, that they are requiring the display of the 10 Commandments in all public schools, in every classroom in all public schools in Louisiana. So why on earth would a Christo-fascist like Mike Johnson not also want to do the same thing on a federal level?
Trump reverses one campaign promise by declaring a national abortion ban by executive order. Challenges to his authority are rejected by the Supreme Court, which has seen new appointments from Trump after it was expanded to 12 justices.
So a couple of things there. Again, Donald Trump has gone back and forth on this issue that he's flirted with a national abortion ban. Then when it's pointed out how wildly unpopular it is, he tries to distance himself from it. First and foremost, Trump is a pathological liar. And while he himself may not care about abortions because presumably he's paid for them, his allies, his ideologically driven allies in Congress and behind Project 2025, so the people staffing his administration, do support a nationwide abortion ban, including, again, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, who is the primary architect behind Project 2025. We have absolutely no reason to believe that they won't enforce a nationwide abortion ban if they get the chance, and every reason to believe they will. Then with regards to the Supreme Court, all I'll say is it is a federal statute which dictates the size and composition of the United States Supreme Court, 9 justices. It's been changed in the past. There's no reason why a Republican Congress under a Republican president wouldn't change it again to further entrench their advantage.
He signs an executive order removing abortion records from HIPAA privacy regulations and announces a new federal data sharing program so states can monitor women's periods. Thousands are...
Oh, I'll say that too, that I think it was led by Ted Cruz and Katie Britt, 2 Republican senators. They had an IVF bill that was ostensibly about protecting IVF, but it really wasn't. And one of the provisions in that bill was actually allowing access and the exchange of medical records, basically allowing the federal government to really push a pro-life, pro-forced birth agenda, and it could potentially track periods as well. This, again, is based in things that Republicans have attempted to pass or propose in legislation.
Detained while crossing state lines under suspicion of seeking an abortion. Trump's acting Secretary of Defense, a disgraced ex-general, fires over 400 generals and admirals, leaving the military leaderless. Other Trump appointees purge the ranks of the CIA, FBI, and Department of Justice.
There's no reason why, under the unitary executive theory, this notion that the president should be able to fire literally anybody in the executive branch or in the federal government that answers directly to the president ultimately, like the Pentagon, like the CIA, like the FBI. There's no reason why sufficiently motivated Donald Trump couldn't and wouldn't do this.
By executive order, Trump withdraws the United States from NATO and ends Pentagon cooperation with Ukraine. Russian tanks enter Kyiv. Vladimir Zelensky is killed. It is announced that Trump will run for a third term, claiming he was unfairly cheated in the 2020 election. His Supreme Court ultimately agrees with this interpretation, paving the way for Trump's 2028 re-election. If you hear all this and believe it is impossible, then ask yourself, what did you believe was impossible just 8 years ago?
Last thing I'll say on this front is that Trump has repeatedly flirted with the notion of running for president exceeding the terms mandated by the 22nd Amendment, which caps presidents at 2 terms. He has repeatedly flirted with that. Republican influencers, Republican strategists, conservative thought leaders have also written to this. There was an article in the American Conservative that we talked about a couple of months ago where they made the case as well for repealing the 22nd Amendment or ignoring the 22nd Amendment and allowing Donald Trump to run for a third term. And you say, well, they're constitutional amendments. They are words on paper. And ultimately, the Supreme Court of the United States is the ultimate arbiter, at least under our current system, of interpreting the Constitution. There's nothing preventing them, as absurd as it may sound, from looking at the plain text of the Constitution, the 22nd Amendment, and saying, actually, dress it in legalese, there should be an exception made for Donald Trump because he actually did win the 2020 election and he was robbed by an illegitimate president, Joe Biden, ergo he's entitled to a third term. The great thing about the Supreme Court of the United States, from their perspective, is they can say whatever they want. They can pick a predetermined outcome and reverse engineer, dress it in legalese and, historical precedent, cherry picked historical precedent or historic facts, and then they have the final determination. So there's, again, no reason to believe that this couldn't possibly happen. These are guardrails which are not divinely crafted nor divinely enforced, and they require reciprocal good faith from genuine believers in our constitutional order. And that is not what the Republican Party and Project 2025 are about. They are solely about the aggrandizement of Donald Trump. So there's absolutely no reason to believe that some, most, or indeed all of this in the Lincoln Project ad couldn't come to pass. Let me know what you think in the comments.